ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। श्री भवानी शंकराय नमः। श्री मात्रे नमः। ओम दक्षिणास्य समारंभा शंकराचार्य मध्यमा अस्मदाचार्य पर्यंता स्मर्या गुरु परंपरा। श्रुति स्मृति पुराणानाम आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शंकरलोक शंकरं। शंकरं शंकराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। परिज्ञानाश्रम श्री गुरु शंकर परिज्ञानाश्रम शंकर सद्गुरु केशव वामन कृष्ण पांडुरंग आनंद परिज्ञान गुरु सद्यो जात शंकर सद्गुरु। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। Jaishankar and good evening. In this session of Samvaad, we have an interview with Dr. Frank Conlon. I'm sure senior members of the Chitrapur Saraswat community would remember Dr. Frank Conlon for his association with our revered Guru Parampara, especially from Srimad Anandashram Swamiji to Srimad Parijnanashram Swamiji and to Srimad Sadyojat Shankarashram Swamiji. This interview is being conducted by Bondal Jaishankar Mam. Jaishankar Mam is a former diplomat focusing on Indian, Southeast Asian and Far Eastern history and economics as well. He was born in Delhi and subsequently was educated there too. He was the creator of the www.chitrapurebooks.com, the digital library of works by, for, and of the Chitrapur Saraswat community. So over to you, Jaishankar Mam, for your interview with Dr. Frank Conlon.
Dear friends, Amchi Bandhavas, Jaishankar. The year 2022 marks the silver jubilee year of the Pitharohan of our beloved Swamiji, His Holiness Shri Satyojat Shankarashram Swamiji. There are a number of online programs to celebrate the Rajatotsava, as it is called, and today's Samvaad or conversation is one of them. The theme of today's talk or conversation is evolution of the Chitrapur Saraswat community from the 18th century to the present, a period of more than 3 centuries. I am Jaishankar Bondal from Delhi, and I welcome the principal discussant for this theme, Dr. Frank Conlon, whom we shall continue to address as Frank Mam, which brings us closer together. Frank Mam is a professor emeritus of history, South Asian studies and comparative religion at the University of Washington, Seattle, where he taught from 1968 to 2001. Dr. Conlon's research includes studies on caste, religious leadership, urban history, and interestingly, the restaurants of Bombay. I discovered this very recently, but in a conversation prior to this dialogue, which has now started, I discovered that he has interest in the tramways also, in the transportation systems. So we will divert a little from our rather staid serious topic to discuss with him about those topics too. Frank Mam served as the chairman of the Association, American Institute of Indian Studies, and served 3 terms as director of the South Asian Center of the University of Washington. He is also founder and co-editor of the International Discussions Network for Asian Studies, titled H Asia, and is managing director of the online bibliography of Asian Studies, published by the Association of Asian Studies. Over the years, Frank Mam has maintained close contact with our community and examined the origins and history of the Chitrapur Saraswat community in depth. In his definitive book, titled A Caste in a Changing World, the Chitrapur Saraswat Brahman 1700 to 1935, brought out in 1977 by the University of California Press, Berkeley. A pleasure and an honor to talk to you, Frank Mam, and welcome to Samvaad.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. If you allow me, I will begin with the epilogue of your story, the post-1935 developments. In the e-interview you kindly gave to the website Chitrapur eBooks, you mentioned that studying and teaching about India has led you repeatedly to discuss and discover new facts and perspectives, and that there is no final settled story. Even as the study of 3 centuries of the Saraswat experience has offered significant insights into the broader issues of societal and cultural and economic change in the wider India. The many insights you offer in your book, I feel, have stood the test of time and validated by the experience of many older and younger people in the community. On behalf of the community, I thank you for the nuanced connection with our heritage, as you put it in your answer. And you have introduced us all to all of these. Would you indicate to us how the Saraswat community, in its long history of migration and settlement and movement, and finally metamorphosing into a united community from various groupings, has managed to have these connections with the heritage over history, as you have seen it, of the community?
Well, the interesting thing is that viewed from a certain distance, many rough edges tend to disappear, and it can appear like a smooth progress from early days right up to the present time. But the thing that is striking, and I'm reminded when I think back to even the period of time when I was studying, was that it was never, you might say, a foregone conclusion that the community would prosper, would remain united, would undergo these changes that are brought about by modernization, the introduction of foreign rule for a while, urbanization, and all of the economic changes that have accompanied those phenomena. It was not, in a sense, it's only, you might say, at the beginning and at the end, you say, well, there was the beginning and this is the end. And it must have been inevitable that this had happened. But in fact, it was a very uneven story. There were times of discontent, disruption, crises, economic and social crises. And in a sense, the one continuing feature really was the ongoing career of the Shri Chitrapur mutt and the Guru Parampara associated with it. Even that was not always smooth, as I think is clear from parts of my book, but that would be, in a sense, exactly appropriate to be considered as we are now looking at the 25th anniversary of the ordination, the ascendancy of the current Swamiji.
Thank you. It's very interesting that you mentioned that over the years the community has maintained or evolved into a sense of unity. Would you like to focus now on what I call and mention as the drivers of change, that is the transition of the community from the agrarian rural background to the semi-urban and modern education framework? That is, with the arrival of foreign powers, with the evolution of our own society as a they were not educated in the Western system of education, but they had certain basic values. How did that happen in brief? I mean, it is a sort of reiteration of what you have mentioned in your book, but I thought it would be useful for our people today, especially the younger people, as you said, the nuance connection with the heritage. It's very important that younger people in the society, our current society, contemporary society,
Yes.
get to know how these people who were at best farmers, at best traders, small traders, and not really traveled out of the immediate confine of the Canara coast, the Konkan coast. How did they
Yes.
manage to get into a certain level of thinking, which again took them to higher levels, which brought them together in contact with the outer society?
Well, I think it was a mix of external factors and internal drive. I mean, you really have to consider the fact that the Banaps were not native to the Kanara district. Their ancestors had gradually migrated down from Goa, both before and after the Portuguese conquest of Goa. And it was in the context of the local conditions in the Kanaras that the core of what comes to be known as the Chitrapur Saraswat Brahmins really takes formation, because you have certain families that are connected with Kula Devatas, Gotra, and to a certain extent occupation, who were clustered in the Kanara district, particularly in the north. And many of them had basically they weren't, I wouldn't characterize them as farmers. They many of them were landowners, but mostly they had others working the land for them. But there was also a considerable number of people who were able to use their capacity as scribes, as writers, mostly serving as very minor functionaries in the revenue collection of the pre-British kingdom, the Nayab of Ikeri, or Bednur, which is up in the above the Ghats. And in a sense, it was in that context that is, of course, I think you know, they were forced to confirm their own Brahmanical status by demonstrating that they had a guru. They had their own guru. And it was from there that the initial beginnings at Gokarn occurred in around 1707, 1708. The adaptation to opportunity was a considerable one. Well, in any case, when the British conquered after the British defeated Tipu Sultan, who at that point was dominating the west coast of Karnataka, initially the British brought their own civil servants, Indian servants, office holders, various sorts in the revenue and judicial offices from Madras side, but they didn't enjoy living in the Kanara coast. It was expensive. They didn't like the rain, and there were all sorts of problems. And also they were expensive to make. They required higher salaries, and so it was at that point that the British began to look for local talent, and this is when the Saraswats really began to emerge. And it was there that you begin to see the development of the demand for education. In a sense, there's a nice parallel, I think, to today, because today's young people are all encouraged to seek education that will reward them with a good job, good prospects, good professions, good future. And in the 1830s and 40s, for a young Banat boy, learning English, obtaining somehow the mastery of English and an ability to do accounts according to the British style became the key to opening up opportunities for employment. And in a sense, it was in the pursuit of that the education began to really spread. The Western education began to spread in Kannada. Now, initially, it was really only centered down in Mangalore, which was the district town, and the north end of Kannada was sort of regarded as being a little bit more backward. in
Tank
fact,
and the
there was
Badak.
for many. Yeah,
The tank and the Badak
exactly.
divide.
Yes, and I mean, for many years that distinction was made. I mean, I remember hearing people in Bombay mention, "Oh, that family's tanky." So
Yes, yes.
they still remember that distinction.
There was some,
But
as an aside, as brief aside, I might mention even in my family, my own father-in-law saying that you marry, you bring in a girl from a certain side and you want the boy, that is your son-in-law, from the certain area. That was in his time, it was there. So, I didn't know this. I'm an alien in alien Saraswat living far away from the other Saraswats, but I didn't know it. I was surprised. Anyway, sorry. I
well, no,
couldn't resist this.
it's but it's of course it's a reminder that even within a small community that you might think would be united in its smallness, you could manage to find distinctions.
Yes.
I think it's nothing short of just human nature that we begin to divide the people that we really like from the people we're not so sure about.
Yes.
Well, anyway, going back to this tradition, that opening of education and opening of jobs in the district government and the various subdivisions, the taluka subdivisions of Kanara, really did give Saraswats a chance to shine and to move up. Although by no means everyone could do that. I mean, there simply were a limited number of positions. But nevertheless, that interest became kind of part of the occupational outline of the community in the 19th century. The British you might say the British did the Bonnops a big favor, although it didn't seem so at the time, because of interest having nothing to do with Kanara at all, they divided the district. South Kanara remained in the Madras presidency, but North Kanara was transferred over to the Bombay presidency. And what this meant was that all of the administrative affairs, all of the educational functions, which had been formerly focused on Madras and through Mangalore, now were to be focused on Bombay. And so it was at that time that you began to have young men trying to go for the matric examination, which in the early days you had to go to the Bombay University. You couldn't take it out in the field. You had to travel up to Bombay, prepare for the study, and take the examinations. And it was in that period in the early 1870s that you began to see young Bonnops coming to Bombay for the first time. Yes. And it really opened the door to a lot of opportunities. The funny thing is, or it's not funny, but I mean, it's the striking thing is that while the history of this community celebrates people like Shamrao Vittal or Narayan Chandavarkar, some of the people who made it big in Bombay, who succeeded in all sorts of ways. The striking thing was a number of young Bonnops came to Bombay, and they either didn't get the right results on the examination, or the family didn't have enough resources to keep them there long enough to get their degrees, but they couldn't really they couldn't see themselves going back home. Perhaps they'd say in disgrace, but at least they would go back home and there'd be no real occupation there except maybe a village school teacher or something of this sort, which was not a high status position. And so they began to stay and pick up jobs in the clerical world, working as what they used to say quill drivers in the offices of the new emerging businesses of the growing city of Bombay. And that really was what planted the seed of the Bonnops coming to the city.
Yes.
So right. In a way, apart from the fact that a few district collectors may or may not have said that the Saraswats were useful people to hire because they were quick at their work and they learned and they did the job well, the fact is the British didn't know the Saraswats existed.
Yes.
When they made their policy decisions, they were making them in the broadest range, but it was just that the Bonnops, some of your Bonnop ancestors, took the opportunities and made something of it.
That's right. This is this quality of pragmatism and the ability to see opportunities where they arise and as they
Yes.
arise that led to this migration, as you very succinctly put it, from the backwaters, if we may call it that, backwaters of
Mhm.
Konkan into the growing metropolis of Bombay, because Bombay also was not that much of a developed area in those days. But it over the last maybe
Let's
40
put it.
years, yes, 40 years of the 19th century, it sort of evolved into a city, a metropolis with a commercial interest,
Yes.
a strategic sea interest,
Yes.
people coming in from outside.
Well,
And so that,
in
that ability to seize the opportunity, I think characterizes not just the, if I may put it, the common people, the Saraswats who are following their own
Mm.
lives, but also the spiritual center of the spiritual center of the community, the mutt. For instance, I think Pandurangashram Swamiji, he was the eighth guru, right? Yeah, the eighth guru took great advantage of the railways which came in at that time, the post and telegraph, and
Yes.
various other Western facilities which were emerging. They were Western in the sense that we didn't have such a systematic thing in India, postal system, for instance, or marketing techniques, setting up a market, setting up a village pharmacy or a doctor, Vaidya,
Yes.
even if you call it that. To do such things was really revolutionary. But uh, how do you explain? I mean, I'm myself a member of the community, but I have not thought of these things. You take certain things for granted. How do you explain the relative orthodoxy, if we may put it that way, orthodoxy of people in their beliefs? Not that the rest of the world was not orthodox, they were orthodox in their own manner. We in India, in our little world, were orthodox in our own manner. That combined with a very pragmatic attitude when it came to, so the two could coexist. How does this small community have that sort of spread? In a bigger community, yes, you can find people of diverse strands, people of diverse colors. But here's such a small community. And just an interesting statistic, I was looking up the censuses, and I find that our 2016 census, started in 2011, still pegs the figure of Saraswats at 25,000. Chitrapur Saraswats at 25,000 world globally. And
Mhm.
I just, for a comparison, tried to look at the Parsi figures. They are not very much higher, but certainly higher than us. So they are more than us. So we are the microcosm in a microcosm. So how do you think, what is your view on this? How do people align themselves mentally to have two opposite characteristics and somehow manage to weld it together into a composite whole? I mean, I don't know whether I'm coming across, but it's my dilemma.
Well, I understand your dilemma because I think every thinking person, in a way, lives in a kind of contradiction between two sets of sort of ideals
Yeah.
or sets or between ideals and practices. Uh, Very few of us live up to our stated principles all the time. But I mean, the thing is, it's interesting is that you mentioned Pandurang Ashram Swamiji. I would even go farther back. The When you think about the early days of the mutt, for the at the time of the establishment of the Chitrapur mutt, because Chitrapur mutt was established when the second Swamiji, Shri Shankarashram, attained Mahasamadhi. The They persuaded the community had to persuade someone to become his successor, because there really had not been a formal Shishya Srikar. So there you had the community, in a sense, trying very hard to preserve the mutt, or to preserve the Guru Parampara, and of course then the mutt becomes associated with that. But it turned out that the person they chose was very pious, very spiritual, and was not particularly adept at going around and encouraging people to pay the tithe, to pay the vantiga, and so on. And so then community kind of intervenes and pushes to have Sri Shankar Ashram adopted as a shishya, and then he follows on and does a good deal more in terms of promoting the mutt and promoting the community's connections. I think that one of the things that was very striking about this is that each time, you might say, there was a leadership that could come from the guru, but there also was a good deal of influence that would come from influential gentlemen, and they were gentlemen, I'm afraid, at that point, no women, in the community, certain grihastas who, in a sense, by virtue of their wealth or their status, perhaps as a pleader, a lawyer, or a district official, could really influence the way in which things went. I think, for example, back in, let's see, what would the area that would be? When Vaman Ashrams had fallen ill, there was a district, a big man in the district, Yellur Devapaya, who was I think he was the government servant. I think he may have been in the courts. And he basically pushed very hard for a former family servant, a young man who'd been a servant in the family's home, who came not from the Shutkala Bhatt family, but from the Nagar family. And this was Krishna Ashram.
Yes.
And the thing was is that he did a lot to build up the community. He traveled a lot, spent a lot of time moving about. And I think this is one of the things that's very important, is the mutt is a place, and we of course we have several mutts, but it is a place, and the guru's pitha is there. But in a sense, to have the community living, the guru has to move about and tour, partly to enforce dharma, to encourage, to settle disputes, in those days, to try to wheedle people into paying their vandikas, because the Bonnets of the 19th century were very tight with their purse. They were very reluctant often to come up with the expected tithes. And it was very striking how this evolution came about. And of course, then subsequently in 1863, when Krishna Ashram attained Mahasamadhi, then Pandurang Ashram came into view. And we have a story, I don't know, we can't document it exactly, but it's a tradition that as a young, after his Shishya Shikar, I think it was in 1859, he was perceived by some of the Saraswat laity as being not being rather lax with his studies, and he was upbraided. I mean, can you sort of imagine, coming in and telling them, it's just, look, you boy, you're not working hard enough. You gotta shape up.
Gentleman concerned was a Sharish, I think it was a justice, a Sharish Sadar or somebody.
Yes.
Ulal Mangeshaya, if I remember.
Yeah, Ulal, that's right. Ulal
who was supposed to have told him that, why do you like to sleep on soft beds? I mean, that is a quote in Gopal Hatandi's book. But this is a thing that where this spiritual power sort of flags a little bit for whatever reasons, economic or otherwise, the secular side of it takes over. So there is a concerted action on both wings of this.
Well, I was going to say that actually Pandurang Ashram Swamiji's reign is interesting because you did have, to a significant degree, because of the gradual migration of Bonnets to Bombay and to a certain extent Madras, you did have a growing secular interest connected with the opportunities. And then you had a few people who became involved with the social reform movements, such as promoting widow marriage and the like. And these were seen as in being direct contradiction to the orthodoxy, which Pandurang Ashram Swami had made it his duty, his life work to promote. So that in a sense, in that period of late 19th century, the Bonnets were progressing on two parallel but never quite meeting tracks. Pandurang Ashram Swami he introduced publication. He wrote a book. He had photographs taken and distributed at the bazaar. When the railway connection from the Southern Maratha Railway was made, and he went to Benares by train, the rail yatra.
Yes.
He never took the opportunity to go to Bombay, which is an interesting aside. But the point is that he was in a certain way very progressive, but he was strictly orthodox. And what I think was interesting was that, as you know, if you've read the book, the community really was divided.
Oh yes.
Whole towns, whole cities were excommunicated because everyone had gone to a wedding dinner with someone who had gone across the Black Water to England, or had maybe possibly even hadn't gone, but had dined with someone who'd gone. It was one of these.
Yeah, this is like electricity. It conducts everything. My own grandfather went to Basra during First World War. He was not in the army, but in the civil side. They belong to the Benegal clan, not the famous Benegal clan, but one of the other Benegals. Yeah. So I think the community by contact the whole group was excommunicated at that time. This is 1916.
Well, yeah, but see, that was really the end of that. I mean, it was very quickly coming to an end, because of course, what was interesting was that Panduranga Ashram Swami stated, if people are not interested in supporting Dharma, if they're not going to support the mutt, and certainly payments to the mutt fell off when he started having these divisions and these excommunications and so on, he said, perhaps it should just end. Perhaps it should end. And it was only really literally in his dying moments that a Shishya Svikar was arranged, and the young boy Shantamurti became Anandashram. I think that the people who encounter today's Swamiji and today's mutt and the various institutions connected with it, it's hard to realize that the mutt and its sort of connections was very frayed and very fragile in about 105, 110 years ago. It's only, I mean, it's just a century, but it was really only after Anandashram. I mean, remember when Anandashram was a boy, he had ascended the pit, but it had been arranged that no one would pay homage to him. They would still pay homage to the padukas of Panduranga Ashram Swami. And in a sense, he was both sidelined and he was significantly dominated by the mutt staff, which included some of his own family members. And he ran away.
Yes.
He tried to flee, and it was with great difficulty persuaded to come back. He then set out to get education, and he went to North India, visited Bombay, and in a sense, all the misunderstandings or all the suspicions that had occurred for over 2 decades really just fell away, because the Mumbaikars, I shall say literally, fell in love with him. And the interest, to go back to the 19th century, remember I said how the big sort of government servants and whatnot would intervene and whatnot. Well, in 1930, Hatyangri Shankar Rao, H. Shankar Rao, who was working as a controller of currency of India, he had a major ICS office, or I don't know if it was ICS, but a major
he was not ICS,
federal
but
office.
he was an expert in this area, finance, basically a finance.
And he takes retirement and he devotes the rest of his life to promoting the mutt, the Swami, and the reintegration of the community. He also worked very hard at a whole series of efforts to try to convince young Saraswats that if they would just be more thrifty, they wouldn't have to worry about the moneylenders and so on. He was something of a Puritan.
Yes.
He was something of a Puritan.
Yeah, there is this stream of dedicated, devoted people who sort of come out of the cold, so to speak, who come and assist the mutt in its era of problems. Like
Yes.
Shankar Rao's meeting in Delhi was a turning point for the mutt, as you mentioned. He sort of gave up his government service. He was due for a promotion, I'm told, by the family.
Yes.
He would have been
Yes.
elevated still. He got some awards from the British also for on the contribution he made in that era. But he left it all and dedicated himself to the service of the mutt. And so this sort of thing happened, I'm sure, at different levels with different people from Bombay,
Yes.
from other cities also. They did their bit in supporting the mutt, amelioration
Yes,
fund,
right.
stabilization fund, and also doing publicity. Like Shankar Rao, I think, started the Ravi Kiran, the Sunbeam, what was called Ravi Kiran, now called the Sunbeam, the magazine,
Right.
for publicity.
Yes.
I mean, they realized that, like Pandranashram Swami, they realized they need to be in contact with the, if I may put it that way, the taxpayers, those who pay the tithe. You have to
Right.
have
Well,
the sustain. You have to have the
getting
sustain.
getting them to pay the tithe. That
Yes,
was,
yes.
I mean, remember, this is the 1930s.
Yes.
The 1930s were
Depression.
a very lean period. There were a lot of redundancies, and wages were cut. And the only thing that you might say that saved the day for the people, for the Bonnets living in Bombay, was that the cost of living did not go up. I mean, it was a period, the decade before the Second World War was a period of you might say, of economic hardship on the one hand, but economic stability on the other, and so it was not so bad. But I mean, it really, even the fact that the Kannada Saraswat Association monthly magazine included sections. I mean, before the Ravi Kiran, or the Sunbeam, was launched in, what was that, 1954, I think. H. Shankar Rao began having sort of supplements put into the magazine so that those members of the association would see the information and become more aware of this. And it also became a vehicle by which Ananda Shramji could have some of his discourses reproduced.
For Anandashram Swamiji also, it was quite an uphill task, as I gather from various readings. It was not very easy, in spite of all the help that he got, because the community was spreading out, spreading beyond India also. At that point of time, people were slowly going out of the thing. So many issues had to be settled. Particularly the issue of what is it called, overseas travel, which was also a problem for in the community, that is, had become a problem which divided people rather than united. So he had to find areas of unity and build on them. But he succeeded magnificently, and because of his manners, his very winning ways, and above all, I think, the ability to listen to people, let them have their talk, let them present their viewpoint, and then give his opinion on that. So that was a welcome change for the community. And so that is a trend that has continued since. Now, if we might,
well,
sorry,
I was just going to say about Anandashram. I mean, by the time I had the opportunity of meeting him,
yes,
which was in 1966, just a few months before his demise, I can just say that I don't know, I can't quite find the exact words to describe it, but coming into his presence was like coming into a sense of comprehension. That you said he didn't say much, but you had this feeling of sort of coherent, complete understanding. I mean, it was just a remarkable figure.
Yes.
And in a sense, that hour that afternoon in Bangalore at the Bangalore Mutt, when I had this opportunity, I understood a lot after that I had not quite figured out before, simply by having the experience of being in his presence.
That's a very, yes, that's the thing that most people, or all people who have met him, say. I was a child and I have not seen him as an adult really, but by the time I grew up, he had attained Mahasamadhi. But still, That is a quality that all our contemporary gurus, I think, have had. By contemporary, I mean in the modern era of our consciousness. Like even Parindanashram Swamiji, his successor, whom he appointed, was a child when he was appointed, like in the tradition of the parampara. But
that is
he rose magnificently to the challenges that were confronting him. He did his best to bring the community together. There were some unfortunate incidents which eventually led to a vacuum, but he restarted the Rath Yatra, the festival, as a means of bringing the community together, a vision that his predecessor had. So there were many attempts at stabilizing the mutt, bringing it together, and this was a signal contribution of the spiritual leadership of our community. And of course, we have now tided over the vacuum, and the present leader, the present spiritual leader of the community, has brought about a sea change. For Shankarashram Swamiji to take the Pitha was itself a big thing, because he knew what had happened before, and he was very much aware of what was going on. It's an age of communication. He could very well figure out what was going on and what had transpired in the community. And also the interesting thing is, for the very first time, I think, in our annals, 300 years, the Swamiji came in as an adult. He was not a child.
Well, he'd had Diksha as a young man before.
Yes, and he has the advantage of
Mount Abu.
Yeah, Mount Abu, and he had the advantage of being aware of so many things. So he could be on the top of things, and the programs that he has initiated, the programs of social amelioration, economic, have exceeded all expectations and bounds. And the community also has responded magnificently to all the things.
I was just going to say, I think that one of the things, as an outsider, as an absolutely bona fide Mlencha, I can say that looking at the tradition of the Guru Paramparas and the mutts, and of course this is not exclusive to the Chitrapur mutt and this Guru Parampara, but others. I mean, other GSB mutts, for example, and there are other mutts. It's that the person who ascends to the peak has taken sannyas. They have renounced life. They have given up their identity. They've given up their things, their worldly events and whatnot. And the idea of sannyas, as it was conceived in the Vedic tradition, was this was something that came not as a young boy, but came after you'd had your full life as a student, as a grahasta, even perhaps vanaprastha. You use this as the moment to seek the last enlightenment and entrance into moksha. But these are in the tradition. The idea of the shishya should be young, should be pure, should be, in a sense, before puberty, and then there's expected to be educated and brought up in the mutt. And we have examples in the history of this tradition of shishyas who had that opportunity. But Anandashram did not have that opportunity. Anandashram was thrust into that position as a 11 or 12-year-old boy, put on Pandurang Ashram's lap, and 4 days later his guru was gone. I mean, he had to educate himself or gain education on his own.
Yes.
And it was very much a traditional education. But when we came to Paradhanashram, he had a completely different background. He'd grown up in the suburbs of Bombay, in the flight path of Santa Cruz Airport. And I remember when I would have conversations with him, he was very interested in science, and he'd read the Scientific American and things, and yet there were the elders of the community still were thrusting upon him their expectations of what they remembered of Anandashram. And this is one of is one of the human tragedies of this story, is that he was a different person, and his approach, of course, as you and I and most people know here, led to a terrible conflict.
Yes.
Really, a very unpleasant thing. And I was in India during part of that time, and I just was very distressed by it all. I was distressed also by his health, because it was clear that he had some serious health problems. But the thing is that stop about this. Think about it. Someone has taken sannyas, but they take up this role, and instead of devoting themselves to attaining the ultimate goal of moksha, of release, that is the characteristic goal of sannyas, they instead of escaping the entanglements of the world, take on the entanglements of an entire community and an institution, and assume this intellectual and personal psychological burden by which they can only keep balance because they have an inner strength. Maybe it's dharma, or maybe
equanimity, and
I mean, I'm reminded in a way, in Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a tradition of the Bodhisattva, who is, in a sense, a Buddha in becoming, who's almost on the verge of attaining nirvana, but who holds back to help others. And I mean, that's the thing about the swamis of this Guru Parampara, is that each in his own way has had to take on burdens, headaches, challenges, in order to try to help the community at large. And I think that whether one is whether a member of the community is highly religious or vaguely religious or quite secular, they cannot help but be impressed by the achievements and the personality, particularly now of the current Swamiji, Sadyot
Shankaracharya. Yes, because he has his hands on in almost every area. His gaze turns to everything, from empowerment of women to agriculture to education to welfare of older people to welfare of the people who are need rehabilitation because of various physical problems, and so on and so forth. So this is actually a very big umbrella of activities, and the programs that we have seen blossoming over the years, the last 20-25 years, have really amazed, because these are the jobs which in many areas are the government's province. At least in India, governments do this. But here you have
they're supposed to do it.
Supposed to do it, yes. But they have their own problems. So we are, in fact, in doing all this, I think the community now, united under the present Swamiji, is pulling itself up by its bootstraps, so to speak, revamping bringing together all the strengths, material, physical, mental, to create a better environment for the community at large. Sort of, as the prosperity of the community increases, material prosperity, the spiritual activity also has kept pace, number one. Number two, an outfall of that is the activity of Swamiji on the material front, having all these schemes and having all the guidance and leadership which transcends spiritualism to get into the material world. As you said, the idea is to attain moksha, but the way to that, I suppose, is through making others happy. So like the bodhisattvas in waiting, it is the same feeling, it is the same thing. Sometimes we take things for granted, we don't really appreciate it, but I mean, you have very succinctly put it, how the responsibilities of the parampara are there in the community in a real sense. So that brings me to that point of the mutt. I think the mutt and the spiritual leadership, which is centered there, has acted as a glue for the community, not just a spiritual glue, but also a physical glue, call it a sort of environmental glue, if I may put it that way, to create, whether you are in Toronto or you are in Yokohama, or I'm saying it figuratively, or in Kuala Lumpur, or in Sri Lanka, wherever you are, or in India, to have a common platform. Otherwise, we, the Saraswats, the Chitrapur Saraswats are so minute, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of
Yes.
population and in terms, but we are punching above our weight in various activities, from IT to sports to Bollywood, to name it. You have signal
Well,
representatives in each area.
yeah,
So, sorry,
I'm
yeah,
just going to,
yeah,
I'm just going to say, you've got to, I mean, I think it's been true. It's certainly been true of my encounters with a number of communities in Bombay. I mean, I've been elsewhere, but Bombay was where I was first working. Uh, I think we all tend to look at the people who've accomplished the most, and we hold them up to ourselves as being models that we should all follow. And I mean, when talking about the Saraswats, say in the early 20th century, well, here's Sir Narayan Chandawarkar, judge of the High Court, head of the social reform movement, England returned, and all of that. Or before his death, Shamro Vittal, you had a few outstanding, outstanding in the sense of being famous individuals, but most of the community were in very modest means.
yes,
And I think in a sense they perhaps enjoyed being associated with people of greatness, and maybe it stimulated them. But what I think was more important was that instead of just talking about you have to get percent on an examination or something, is that all along, if you look back to at least going back to the beginnings when the Saraswat Quarterly began, which became the Congress Saraswat, every month, every quarter, there would be activities celebrating achievements. They might be educational achievements, whatnot. I remember someone joked that when the Congress Saraswat arrived, people treated it like a Persian book. That is to say, they went to the back to see who'd arrived, who departed, who'd passed the examination. And they would get to the editorial content later on after they'd had their tea. But I mean, it was it really was one Saraswat, of course, very famous, who's certainly made an impact on India, Shri Nandan Nilekani.
yes.
Nandan Mam. I had an opportunity of interviewing Nandan Mam in Bangalore at the Infosys headquarters about 15 years ago. And he made an observation, which I thought really rang true. He said there was a concept in Western sociology of social capital.
Yes.
And he said he thought that the Bonups had somehow mastered the idea, whether they knew about the term social capital or not. They had in a sense made the most of it and he pointed out, for example, that when he was a boy coming up from North Canara to study at the IIT Bombay, that he'd been able to stay at Talmaki Wadi as a paying guest or as a and then he talked about the various scholarship forms and whatnot, and how it kept going back and forth, reinforcing the opportunities for the people in the community. And I think that's a very important part of it. It's I think the concept of social capital, generally speaking, is thought of as being secular, but I think you might say that the Saraswats also had spiritual capital, and that spiritual capital was derived from the leadership of the Guru Parampara, at least in the 20th century.
Yes, because the society confronts all sorts of challenges all through. It has, as you said, there has never been a golden age. It is every generation has its challenges, whether it is money, whether it is status, whether it is self-esteem, whatever it is. But then the Saraswats have a certain way of tiding over it, united or not united, individual. Today, individualism has come into the being. Nuclear families are this thing, rather than joint families. Parents are not there. A child is in Boston or Seattle and parents are in Wadi or Madras, wherever they are. But still, I think they call it, as we mentioned about cuisine, either the cuisine or the language or whatever. Our conversation is entirely conducted in English, but I'm sure whenever I speak Konkani, whatever I'm speaking, you are understanding it all. You know, in that sense, you sort of become a member of the community also. Having it has been,
an
the
honor.
community has made you welcome. I mean, in the sense that the community has, not me alone, but the community has made you welcome. And
But
sort of,
Jaishankar, Mom, let me just mention something else I think is very important.
yeah.
Konkani.
Hmm.
Konkani is, of course, a language. I mean, it's very diverse. There's Konkani spoken down in Cochin. There's Konkani spoken in Goa. There's Konkani in Canada. But the point is that in no place in India outside of Goa, and I'm not even sure about Goa nowadays with the change in population, is Konkani a majority language. I mean, it's a majority maybe in a village. It's a majority in a region, but it's always been another. So that Banaps have, from the very beginning of the beginning of outward movement, have had to know other languages. They've had to know, well, in South Kannada, they certainly would know Tulu, have to learn Kannada, and moving to the north, Marathi. I mean, English was there, but I think that the fact that many people were multilingual out of necessity,
Yes,
gave them a leg up.
Mhm.
I cannot remember the author's name. Padma. Well, actually, I think I think she'd married out of the community, but she talked about being in the hall of their family home in
Padma
Bangalore.
Benegal, Padma Ramarao's daughter.
No,
Benegal Ramarao's daughter. No.
I'm not. Let me just. I'll leave it vague because I can't be sure. But she pointed out that the conversation after the meal, the uncles would all sit around talking, and they would start punning,
Mhm.
and they would pun in Konkani, in Tulu, in Kannada, in English,
Yeah.
in Tamil. I mean, it was this linguistic flexibility,
Mm.
which I think is a tremendous advantage.
Mm.
A tremendous advantage. You know, when Burma Shell offices began to employ Banaps in Calcutta, they started learning Bengali. I mean, it was just you know, it's one of these things that I think it has less to do with the mutt as such, but it does have to do with some of the reasons why I think the Banaps have been as successful as they have been.
It's a question of, I think, internal genius which is cultivated. Wherever you are, you blend in with the community, so much so that sometimes we also do not maintain a high profile where identity is concerned. I mean, in the sense that even today, my name says something, I look very different. I'm talking of myself. I look very different, and my colleagues in service, when I was in service, could not fathom where I came from. So I had to give out this whole story of Konkan coast. And what would occur to them was, oh, Goa. I said, yes, of course, that's the most important. Go south of Goa. Go south of Goa. So Bangalore. But they miss out Mangalore, you see. So this is that thing. You have to navigate yourself between these uncertainties and this thing. But having said that, in the course of my very long stay in this city, Delhi, I think I speak fairly fluent Punjabi. So, which helped me also when I was in the sister city next to yours. I was in Vancouver.
Yes.
I had 36 Gurudwaras
Oh,
under
yes.
my belt. And every Sunday I found
Yes.
myself at a Gurudwara giving a little speech to the local Punjabis.
Very good.
So they said, who are you?
Very good.
So, who the heck are you? Your name is this and you are this. Are you? You are not a Punjabi. So I said, consider me whatever. I am a human being at the best. So if you get your share of good Punjabi for half an hour after having a nice Punjabi meal, what more do you want? You can be satisfied and go home. So
I think the two are together. Well, I will tell you a little. I mean, this is probably not of much interest to anybody except one person who might be listening, and that is my friend and colleague Ramesh Ganguly, who was also on the faculty here at the University of Washington.
Yes, he's an institution.
In 1965, autumn of '65, I was introduced to him and Ramesh Ganguly, and I said, "Oh," I said, "I know where you're from. Your family's from." And he said, "I'm not a Bengali." I said, "Who said who anything about Bengal?" I said, "You're from Ganguly, across the creek from Kundapur." And I think for the first time and the only time in his life, Ramesh had no words. He
I'm
was
sure.
stunned.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I'm sure. Because through your academic interests and your personal interests, more than academic, people, a lot of people work on various subjects, but I think you have really sort of adopted the community and vice versa, if I may say so. We have adopted you too. Over the years, it's only this thing that you stay so far away that you are unable to visit us, or we are unable to visit. And
I know.
still,
I wish I could be there more often, but
yes, I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. And I missed that opportunity to meet you in Seattle when I was in Vancouver. My uncle was, maybe you know my uncle, he was also Niranjan Benegal, the architect. Who is
sure.
No more.
Yes, no.
He's no more. His
No.
wife is there.
He was your uncle.
Yes, he's my uncle.
I didn't know that.
Saraswats are so everybody has everybody's uncle.
Oh,
I have
I
written a small limerick on the family links. I'll just send it to you later on.
Okay.
Anyway, everybody is related. Everybody comes out says, "Ayo to magar patone agal bhache gal jamai," whatever that means. I can't figure it out.
The reason I met Niranjan through his wife Shanta.
Yeah.
One day I was coming off campus in the city bus heading out to our neighborhood, and sitting behind me were two women, and they were speaking Konkani.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't really follow what they were saying, but I knew it was Konkani.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned around and I said, "You're speaking Konkani." Well, it was Shanta Benegal.
Mm-hmm.
And in Bangalore, I visited her mother. She was staying just around the corner from the Pillars in the housing colony there.
Mm-hmm.
But well, as I say, I think we were supposed to be talking about how about the history and the institutions, and now we've fallen into just chit chat.
No, it is not that. It's also a part of the whole makeup of Saraswats is that informal chit chat, which establishes bigger links, which carries you on to different heights.
That's right.
Well, I think we have discussed a lot about the community. Today it has assumed if I may put it that way, a global characteristic. You are local as well as global. You find a lot of people from my community in your country living there. Yes. And doing well there, I think, contributing, like Nandan Nilekani earlier, contributing a great deal of brain power to this thing. So I think it augurs well for the community, even though we are small and we are sort of also aging, an aging community like the Japanese or the Swedish or the British. But I think we have made our mark in as a community. I'm saying we have made our mark in different areas of activity. So I think I think we leave it at that. But I think I'll switch to some more topics that we have newly realized that you are also an expert in, which is the restaurants of Bombay. Please tell us more about that, what you have worked, and also on the trams.
Well, the trams had been abandoned about 9 months before I first got to Bombay. And all I remember is seeing the tram tracks out on what is now, I think, Annie Besant Road. It was the big highway out to Dadar. And there were still tracks and wires, but trams were gone. Now, I was always interested in the history of Bombay as an institution, as a complex of interests. And back about 1990, I was invited to make some sort of contribution to a new project called the study of consumption, public culture. And this book, I think it was called The Modernity of Consumption in India, had a chapter which I wrote called Dining Out in Bombay. And I went back and did quite a bit of research looking for the early records of opening of restaurants, both English and Indian, and then followed up into the 20s and 30s, finally using a magazine which didn't last very long. It was called Bombay Magazine, and they used to have restaurant reviews, and I was able to compare their reviews with my own experience. Those people who are listening in on this who've met me know that I'm not characterized by being overly slender. As I put it once, my opinions about dining out carry some weight.
That's a good point.
But I was able to basically explore how things had changed. I mean, how what had begun as almost, you might say, a foreign concept of going to a public place and dining in public view turned out to be in the growth of popular consumption and so on, had become a feature of Bombay's urbane life, and in a sense set a style that spread to other parts of India as well. So that was as far as the tramways went. I've always been, and I think we talked about this before, something of a rail fan. And growing up, I was fascinated by the tram cars that were disappearing slowly from our cities. And so I thought, while I was working in the archives over the years, whenever I saw something having to do with the tramways in Bombay, I just take a note, and I soon had a folder full of information. And so I put it together for a publication a few years ago. Just an article that was in a collected group of essays about Bombay. But the thing was that when I got to Bombay, it was all very new to me, and it all was fascinating. And I think I've said this on some occasion, but probably never in this context. I think when anyone goes someplace they've never been before, they see it and they observe it and they take note of what's around, or at least as much as they can comprehend. And from that point forward, that is the point zero from which they judge change. And I came to realize this when I'd be talking to older members of the Saraswat community who would be talking about the good old days. And these were talking about the good old days of the 1930s, which puzzled me a great deal, although I later came to understand a little bit more about that. And for them, that was the change. I think everybody reinvents reality because it's what they perceive. And I think that the younger people, if they're listening to this, will recognize that if you listen to old people natter on about this and that, and do you remember this, or do you remember that place, you get sort of bored and you say, oh, yes, there they go again. But someday you'll do that. So pay attention to what's going on around you right now, because you're going to call upon it to reminisce and bore the younger generation in the future.
So thank you, Frank Mam, again, for a very incisive presentation on the community. It's not easy to compress a couple of hundreds of years and the value systems that go with that. It's years you can judge by the calendar, but it's not that. It's very important to have both feet on the ground and the head in the sky. And I think the Saraswats have done that very much in whatever areas of work activity. And you have been a signal chronicler of that. You expressed a wish to have a sequel to your book. I hope you are able to do it somewhere, sometime. And
in another life, I'm afraid.
No, you might do it in this life. But we wish you all the very best of health. Sure. And since we began with the role of Swamiji's, I came across these lines in Gopal Hattangdi's book, the book that we have talked about. As he said, as a tribute to the leadership, the past and the current. He says that his grandmother, I think it was his own grandmother, said, told her family, and I'll speak in Konkani, but you must be aware of the translation. Chalda Amgal Swami Malari Ullaital Deva. child Swamis are called
Yes.
to speak.
Yes.
To that, I would like to add not only speak but act. In today's age, it is action that is supreme. So I think that is a very punchy tribute to the parampara. There's another saying that I was particularly struck was that also, I think somebody in his family, probably another grandparent, told him, blessed were the devoted, and this is in English, blessed were the devoted and determined ancestors who gave us our mutt. Blessed are the embodiments of humility, equanimity, patience, and forgiveness who have ruled our Swadharma Raj with perfect wisdom. And blessed are we who have had the singular good fortune to inherit such a worthy legacy. May we deserve it. This is something which has been said and quoted very often. We don't pause and think of these things because daily life, the grind of daily life takes us on. But thank you very much for all your time, your patience, in spite of several other pressing issues. You have taken time off to speak to us. I am honored and delighted to have the opportunity to introduce you, not just to the older people who would know you better than I do perhaps, but to the younger lot who will, I'm sure, see this YouTube and the recordings which are a part of the Rajatotsava celebrations. And it remains for me only to thank our anchors, managers, bosses, Shantish Nail and Archana Kumta. Both have done a signal job in doing this and bringing us together. And all that remains to me to say is to wish you good health and happiness, and you and to Mrs. Conlon also, our best regards, and God bless. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to just say that it has been a great privilege to have this opportunity to try to reminisce over and condense a lot of time and a lot of information. But it was a great privilege for me to have been, in a sense, taken in back in 1966 and allowed to pursue this study over the years. I can't begin to think of the number of people who helped me and who were so willing to cooperate and help collect things. I mean, even when we were, the last time I was at the Mutt in 2005, 2007, something like that. Why when we drove back, General Gokarn drove us back to Mumbai, and we stopped at a place in Gokarn, and he gave me a lot of old copies of the Sunbeam that I had not been able to locate before. Okay. And it was just, I mean, people just were so generous, and I can only say I appreciate it very, very much. It's a great honor.
Thank you very much. Sakrankai Barenjao, as we say. Be well, stay healthy. God bless. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Sabha Samapti Prarthana. Om Nandantu Sadaka Sarve Vinashyantu Vidushakaha Avastha Shambhavi Mestu Prasannostu Guru Sada Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkham Apnuyat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Namah Parvati Pate Har Har Mahadev.